Huge news, of course, that the U.S. government has reached a $1.95 billion deal with Pfizer and BioNTech for 100 million doses of their experimental COVID-19 vaccine. And, of course, this is all once they get the Food and Drug Administration's approval. And then there's talk of that additional 500 million doses that could also be picked up, and that we would get the vaccine for free was another part of this big story that we've been talking about. Dr. Dean Finelli joins us. He's an expert on pharmaceutical and chemical-related technologies, and he's also a partner in the intellectual property department of Seyfarth, I think it is, Shaw LLP's Washington, D.C. office. I might have butchered that law firm, but he has the experience in this arena and with IP management, which with technology, that's very, very big. Dr. Dean, thanks so much for coming on.
Great to be with you.
So let's talk about how big this is.
Yeah, this is really incredible news. The death toll continues to rise. Cases continue to rise. So as the way we get back to normal is with a vaccine, and having acquired these 100 million doses with the potential to have 500 million, it's going to be a Herculean task, once we have an approved vaccine, to roll it out to 300 million Americans. So this is a great sign of that.
So I'm curious, in your side of it, that's why I specifically mentioned the fact that you have that IP background. This has got to be kind of convoluted, right, with all the transactions and licensings and the due diligence. I mentioned the Food and Drug Administration. It's got to be kind of a circus because this is fast-paced, right?
Yeah, tremendous amount of licensing going on. Deals are going on. A lot of these agreements are, being done because of how quickly we're moving. These are handshake agreements that are being done even before they're papered. So you're exactly right. The urgency and the need that we have is really outweighing the lawyers getting involved with the paperwork, but definitely very promising news.
It is very promising news. And looking at that from the pharmaceutical and chemical technology area, too, and you've seen lots of this come down the pike. Is this one of the, and of course, we're in unprecedented times, this is one of the most, I'll call it, interesting things that you've seen, that how fast this has happened?
Unbelievably fast, Kate. Typically, when you're talking about vaccine development, you can go anywhere from 10 years, in some cases more. Here, the genome was just identified of the virus in January. Fast forward 6 months, and we have some companies that are already in phase 3, which is the critical trial prior to approval, where we're going to look for that efficacy in these large 30,000 or more patient subject populations. So really unprecedented. I've never seen anything like this before. I don't think anyone has. But the Trump administration with Operation Warp Speed is really trying to coordinate with the FDA and the other regulatory agencies, with all these companies that are developing these vaccines, to make sure that whatever comes onto the market, whichever vaccine candidate is first, that it is safe and it is effective.
So as a lawyer, when you have something like this happen, Operation Warp Speed, how many lawyers are involved in this with all the licensing that we mentioned at the beginning of this?
Oh, there's, in addition to the thousands of scientists that are working on the development, there's probably an equal amount of lawyers that are just looking at all these contracts. So, but I can assure you that lawyers aren't holding things up. It's the science that's dictating.
Yeah, I just picture in my mind having lawyers in my family that, you're working late into the night, you're finding we got to get this approval and we got to make sure we sign off on this. And there's this giant oak table somewhere and there's just so many lawyers. And then you have the scientists in another area. But in all seriousness, that's the importance, the availability, making it happen and getting it through. And you know that intellectual property can be tricky.
Yeah, it can. And a lot of companies have said they're not going to make intellectual property hold this up. And when we think about intellectual property, typically we're thinking of patents, trademarks, et cetera. And when a patent's filed, that would preclude other people from, for example, in this case, using a vaccine that would be under patent. But here, it's very reassuring to hear a lot of companies, just because of the humanitarian need, they're relaxing strict patent standards, and even if patents are issued, the humanitarian aspects of this will outweigh that. So I think most important thing everyone realizes is let's get a vaccine that's safe onto the market as quickly as possible.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, Dr. Dean Finelli, thank you so much.
It was my pleasure. Thank you, Kate.
All right, so once again, there is no question when you look at it, a $1.95 billion deal. I want to make sure I said that correctly. $1 billion deal for 100 million doses of Pfizer's COVID-19 vaccine. And that's big that the government's paying for that. Obviously, like Dr. Dean said, it's that Operation Warp Speed, and it would be available to all of us for free, maybe by October. I mean, there's the key thing. We don't know for sure that it's going to be October, and you know how that is. We don't want to be sitting on October, but wouldn't that be fantastic? And at least by the spring, streamlined, and then there we are. And the fact that they can get that additional, and I mentioned that those additional doses, now they're saying really up to 500 million. So those are the new numbers that I have. I want to make sure those numbers are right because that's significant. 500 million doses. Wow. And Pfizer and their vaccine partner would get that payout upon the receipt of the doses. And that follows what I was talking about with Dr. Dean, regulatory authorization, approval, all of that. That's why it's so significant, because to be in the middle of this from the legal aspects of it and, of course, from the scientific aspects, and to make this happen so quickly, I mean, you have to have the humanitarian side of this completely on your mind, because normally this would never, ever be able to move the way it has so swiftly. And again, this still has to be approved by the Food and Drug Administration, and nations around the world, of course, are waiting with bated breath, and they've already started ordering vaccines that are still being tested as part of the way to try to blunt this horrible impact of the pandemic that we know has really kind of rolled our lives in all aspects of it and killed economies. And, of course, more than 600,000 people since the beginning of the year. So the U.S. has ordered the experimental shots developed already by the University of Oxford and AstraZeneca as well. And just as a quick aside, because we talk about the markets and we talk about how one thing rises, another thing crashes, and we're seeing that in so many different industries, the industries that are making a quick turn and are able to do something innovative or different or whatever, or industries that are just lend themselves to it. So, of course, pharmaceuticals and the development of this. So I'm watching Pfizer, and you keep seeing the shares mostly rise, and the same thing with BioNTech as well. That's the other partner in this. And of course it is, because could this be a bigger moment in our lives when we're talking about the race to see a vaccine? In talking to a doctor the other day, he likened it to, and we've talked about this before, to think about polio and the devastation of polio, but nothing like a pandemic. And then we go back and think about the first pandemic, which killed my great-grandmother, who I knew no details about, because all of a sudden they're in the middle of this Spanish flu and trying to figure out ways to help people. What can they do? And we saw what the devastation, or have read about the devastation at those times, what it was, and how many people lost their lives. And it's hard to compare the eras, and because of the differences between what we're talking about with Spanish flu and what we're talking about with COVID-19. However, the droplets, et cetera, the exposure, and how it's a kind of a fumbling around, figuring it out, throwing those darts. Of course, smart people throwing the darts, but really racing to make it happen and get us to the place where we need to be. All right, stay with us. Much more coming up on the flip side.